It's the 1980s. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, commonly known then as the USSR, soon to be known as the Russian Federation. In the city of Leningrad, a Russian-Armenian scientist got his hands on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Since he'd been attending a special English language school since childhood, this granted him the ability to read in English fairly well. As a child, he had read the government-sanctioned translation of The Hobbit into Russian. When he learned there were sequels to that amazing story, he was ecstatic. He met with some smugglers who had the full 3 volumes. As he worked long and hard on doing research to help children affected by the Chernobyl incident, he would come home late at night and translate bits and pieces of The Lord of the Rings into Russian. He had no hopes of publication, for he wasn't part of the Writers' Union then, and this dictated everything published in the USSR. Eventually, he finished translating in the late 1980s, and he didn't stop working. He put in more paper into his typewriter and began to come up with ideas for the future of Middle-earth. As his society fell, little did he know that this duology he wrote would later give him the title of the father of modern Russian fantasy. This man was Nick Perumov. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union didn't have the same copyright laws that America and other Western Bloc countries did. So, as books like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings were published and smuggled into Russia, people made those stories their own. This started projects such as The Fabulous Journey of Mr. Bilbo Baggins, The Hobbit, and Hraniteli, or Guardians in English. The first being an adaptation of The Hobbit, and the second being one of Lord of the Rings. Because these were film and telenovel adaptations produced during Gorbachev's era due to perestroika and glasnost, they were easily made. However, Perumov was not the first to translate the trilogy into Russian. The first was done by Zinaida Bobur, a translator and member of the Writers' Union. She feared that she had enough legery in the book and that it would cause the translation to be denied publication. So she rewrote the whole thing, so it became a sci-fi novel. It was still denied, however. So overall, it was because of the government of the USSR that prevented the trilogy from being published. Back to Nick. Born Nikolai Danilovich Perumov, his middle name tells us his father was named Danila, according to Slavic naming traditions. He grew up in Leningrad, which is now the city of St. Petersburg. He learned English in school and became a molecular biologist out of university, and he worked at the Institute of Macromolecular Compounds of the Russian Academy of Sciences in Leningrad. Because of his obsession with Tolkien, he joined a Russian forum around Middle-earth called the Fidonet, under the pseudonym Captain Urthang. We already talked about how he fan-translated Lord of the Rings and his new ideas. These ideas eventually culminated into The Descent of Darkness. After he wrote 2 books worth of story, he shared it with some friends in a form called Sazmitat, or self-publishing, which was an illegal form of Soviet sharing of banned literature. Plot. The story of Ring of Darkness follows a young hobbit of the name Falco Brandybuck, a descendant of Mary Brandybuck. 300 years have passed since Lord of the Rings. The Shire is peaceful, and Arnor has been reclaimed. However, dark things appear to be stirring. A dwarf named Thorin pulls up to Buckland and asks for the Red Book of Westmarch, for he needs information because Moria is becoming dangerous once again. Falco says he has a copy. Eventually, these two leave the Shire and travel through the Middle-earth as warlords. The author definitely broke down the idea that hobbits are warm and fuzzy, didn't he? Also, he invented his own region of Middle-earth. He really took some creative liberty. Though, to cut him some slack, he wouldn't have had all the access to much information about Arda available now in pre-internet days and also in Soviet Russia. Eventually, a friend that he had shared it with said in late 1991, "Hey, I know this guy who runs a publishing joint. You can get your stuff published." Nick laughed and said, "It won't happen, man, but okay," and handed over the manuscript. The publishing house was called Severozapad, which means Northwest, under the Caucasian Library Publishing Group. The duology was later edited and published as Koltsatimui, or Ring of Darkness, or 300 years later. I mean, that was definitely a play. I mean, we're all there back again. Both volumes were published simultaneously. In a country where tight copyright laws like the United States, this would be very illegal. However, Tolkien was dead, and his estate had no power in Russia. Therefore, authors could now publish whatever they wanted with no repercussions, and Western fantasy was all the rage then. So books such as The Last Ring Bearer, which you may have heard of if you're a hardened Tolkien fan, or less-known relics such as The Black Book of Arda, are both legal fanfiction published. The first volume was called Elven Blade of Koltsatimui, and the second Black Lance. The first print run sold out fast and has been reprinted since. In 1995, he wrote a sequel called The Adamant of Henna. However, this one turned out to be less successful. These books made Perumov famous around Russia and several other Eastern European states, as they were translated into Lithuanian, Bulgarian, Swedish, and other languages. However, all success comes with a price, as a group of Russian Tolkien fans considered his work an abomination, as he challenged Tolkien's ideology of good versus evil. They attempted to attack him as a mob, though he made it out of there. In 1998, during the Russian constitutional crisis, he moved to Dallas, Texas, where he worked for a PhD. There, he tried to get his books published in English. However, none of them became as successful as in Russia. He eventually migrated to North Carolina and currently works in the city of Kannapolis as a biophysicist. He still writes books in Russian, though to less fanfare. Also, in 1998, a Russian-Canadian woman by the name of Nadia Nekryodova began an upload translation of the book onto OCities. However, eventually she pulled them off and kept only summary translation, due to probably copyright infringement. At a certain vague point in 2011, Nick and some others attempted to translate the trilogy of Rings of Darkness into English, finally. However, it is now wiped from the internet. A translate of Chapter 5 of Black Lance is still there, but however, nothing else is there. I'm assuming that due to the fear of being sued, it was pulled from the web. He's tried hard not to spread this to the English internet, but I've pulled some of it out. However, more recently, there was a comic version published in Russia of Elefisky Klinok, or the first book, Elven Blade. Anyway, I thought this was a very interesting topic, considering, at least in the United States, you couldn't do this, but in the chaos of early Russia, you could. So I just wanted to talk about it. Anyway, bye. See you guys in the next video.